November 12, 1330, a narrow mountain gorge somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains. The ground is slick with blood and rain. Hungarian knights in full armor lie crushed beneath boulders and tree trunks. Arrows protrude from gaps in plate mail like porcupine quills. The most powerful army in Eastern Europe, 30,000 strong, is being systematically destroyed by shepherds, farmers, and woodsmen who 3 days ago were tending sheep and cutting timber. King Charles Robert of Hungary, ruler of one of Europe's mightiest kingdoms, is stripping off his royal robes and handing them to a terrified nobleman, desperately trying to disguise himself as a commoner to escape with his life. How does the most powerful monarch in the region end up fleeing through mountain passes, dressed in dirty peasant clothes, his entire army annihilated behind him? The year is 1330, and Europe's power structure is about to be rewritten by the people everyone underestimated. Before we dive into this forgotten story of impossible odds and tactical genius, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history that textbooks conveniently forget, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand why 12,000 poorly armed Wallachian peasants managed to obliterate Europe's most powerful army, you need to understand the trap these people were living in. The date is 1324. In the royal chancellery of Buda, King Charles Robert of Hungary puts his seal on a document. The words are carefully chosen: our voivode of Wallachia, voivodum nostrum Transalpinum. Basarab, the voivode of Wallachia, is officially Charles's vassal. Wallachia pays tribute. Wallachia bows. Wallachia exists at Hungary's pleasure, but something is shifting in the Carpathian Mountains. Wallachia is not a grand kingdom. It's a collection of valleys and mountain fortresses south of the Transylvanian Alps, north of the Danube River. The people here are Vlachs, Romanian-speaking shepherds and farmers who have lived in these mountains for centuries. They're squeezed between the jaws of 3 empires: the Kingdom of Hungary to the north and west, the Bulgarian Empire to the south, and the ever-expanding Ottoman threat from the southeast. For generations, they've paid tribute to whoever had the biggest army pointed at them. Basarab is different. Born around 1270, Basarab rose to become voivode, military commander and prince of this fractured land sometime around 1310. His name suggests Cuman or Turkic origins, but contemporary chronicles all identify him as Vlach, Romanian. What matters isn't his blood. What matters is that he understands something the Hungarian king doesn't. These mountains are not just geography, they're weapons. By 1325, Basarab stops paying tribute. He conducts his own foreign policy to the south, making alliances without Hungary's permission. Charles Robert is furious. In a new royal diploma dated June 18, 1325, the language changes. Basarab is no longer our voivode. He is now Basarab of Wallachia, unfaithful to the king's holy crown. Basarab Transalpinum Regi Coron Infidelum, unfaithful, rebellious, a shepherd who forgot his place. Charles Robert is not some minor nobleman. He is Charles I of Hungary, king of Hungary and Croatia since 1308, member of the prestigious Capetian house of Anjou, the same French royal dynasty that ruled Naples, Sicily, and half of the Mediterranean world. After decades of civil war and rival claimants, Charles finally consolidated absolute power over Hungary by the early 1320s. He rebuilt the kingdom's finances, crushed rebellious nobles, and turned Hungary into a centralized powerhouse. His army is the pride of Eastern Europe, 30,000 men including heavy cavalry, Transylvanian Saxons, shapely warriors, countless Cuman horsemen, and mercenaries from across the kingdom. In 1330, after defeating the Bulgarians at the Battle of Velbujde, Charles decides it's time to remind the shepherd from Wallachia who owns these mountains. The war starts with encouragement from 2 of Charles's key allies, the voivode of Transylvania and a nobleman named Dionysi, who later bears the title ban of Severin. Severin, that's the key. The fortress of Severin sits on the border between Hungary's Banat and Wallachia, a strategic citadel controlling access through the Carpathians. It's been disputed for decades. In 1330, Charles captures it and hands it triumphantly to the Transylvanian voivode. Wallachia has just lost its most important defensive position. Basarab knows he's in trouble. he sends envoys to the Hungarian king with an offer designed to avoid catastrophe: 7,000 marks of silver as compensation for the costs of Charles's military campaign. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to 75 kilograms of gold, a staggering sum for a small mountain principality. Basarab also offers to formally submit the fortress of Severin to Hungarian control, to pay yearly tribute, and to send his own son as a hostage to guarantee his loyalty. It's a desperate offer. It's everything Charles could want without fighting. Charles Robert refuses. According to the Viennese Illuminated Chronicle, a contemporary account written within years of the battle, Charles says this about Basarab: "He is the shepherd of my sheep, and I will take him out of his mountains, dragging him by his beard." Another account records Charles boasting that he will drag the voivode from his cottage, as would any driver his oxen or shepherd his sheep. A shepherd, a peasant, someone to be dragged. The king's advisors beg him to accept the offer or at least give a milder reply. They understand what Charles doesn't. Invading the Carpathian mountains at the end of autumn is madness. But Charles is riding high from his recent victory over Bulgaria. He believes his 30,000-strong army is invincible. He marches deeper into Wallachia without proper supplies or adequate reconnaissance. Basarab watches the Hungarian army cross the mountains and does the one thing Charles never expects: he runs. Charles Robert enters Curtea de Arges, the main city of the Wallachian state, located on the left bank of the Arges River at an elevation of 420 meters on the southern slopes of the Transylvanian Alps. It's Wallachia's capital, the seat of Basarab's power. But when the Hungarian army arrives, Basarab is gone. He has fled into the mountains with his army, disappearing like smoke into the dense forests and high passes of the Carpathians. Charles occupies the city. He's won right, but there's a problem. It's early November. Winter is coming to the Carpathians. Charles's massive army of 30,000 men needs food, and the Wallachians have taken it all with them. The fields are empty. The granaries are bare. What Charles doesn't realize is that Basarab has implemented a scorched earth strategy. Every resource that could feed the Hungarian army has been removed or destroyed. After days of difficult marching through increasingly hostile terrain, with supplies dwindling and winter closing in, Charles realizes he's trapped. He can't stay. His army will starve. He needs to get back to the Hungarian plain before the mountain passes become impassable. Basarab sends envoys again. This time there's an agreement, an armistice. In exchange for safe passage out of the mountains, Basarab will provide guides who know the shortest route back to Hungary. Charles agrees. He has no choice. But this is the moment where most men would take the shortest route home. Basarab does the opposite. The Wallachian guides lead the Hungarian army into a narrow mountain ravine. Some historians place the location at Lovestia in the Olt Defile. Others argue it was near the border between Oltenia and Severin. The exact location is still debated, but what matters is the terrain: a narrow gorge with steep slopes on both sides, barely wide enough for the army's baggage train and cavalry to march through single file. The date is November 9, 1330. The Hungarian army enters the pass. The Wallachian army, along with thousands of local peasants recruited from villages in the surrounding mountains, is waiting on the ridges above. What happens next is not a battle, it's a slaughter. Wallachian archers, foot soldiers armed with simple bows, begin raining arrows down from the heights. The Hungarian cavalry, trapped in the narrow gorge, can't maneuver. Their heavy armor, designed for open-field combat, becomes a death trap. They can't charge uphill. They can't turn around. They can't even see where the arrows are coming from through the dense forest cover. Then come the trees. Basarab's forces have prepared timber blockades and felled trees across the escape routes. As the Hungarian column tries to retreat, Wallachian peasants, woodsmen who have spent their lives working these mountains, roll massive logs and boulders down the slopes. Knights in full plate armor are crushed. Horses scream and panic, throwing riders into the chaos. The narrow pass becomes a traffic jam of death. For 3 days, November 9th through November 12th, the Hungarians try to fight their way out. But you can't fight terrain. You can't cavalry charge gravity. The Wallachian forces, numbering probably less than 10,000 men, some sources say 7,000, others estimate up to 10,000, use every advantage the mountains give them. They attack from all sides. They block escape routes. They shoot, disappear into the forest, and shoot again from a different position. The Hungarian knights, the pride of Eastern Europe, are reduced to helpless targets. On the final 2 days of the battle, the Wallachians close in for hand-to-hand combat. Heavy cavalry fighting uphill in narrow terrain loses every advantage. The Wallachian cavalry, lighter, more mobile, knowing every rock and tree, charges into the chaos. Peasant soldiers with axes and spears swarm the immobilized knights. King Charles Robert watches his best warriors die and realizes the horror of his situation. The escape routes are blocked. The Wallachian cavalry has surrounded his position. He's about to be captured or killed. This is the moment where survival instinct overrides pride. Charles takes off his royal robes, the ornate garments that identify him as the King of Hungary, and gives them to a nobleman named Defied, son of Dionysi. Defied puts them on, becoming a decoy king. He dies under a hail of arrows and stones, mistaken for Charles Robert. While the Wallachians focus on the man wearing the royal insignia, Charles, dressed in dirty civilian clothes, makes a desperate escape attempt with a handful of loyal followers, but he almost doesn't make it. According to a royal charter, Charles himself issued on December 13, 1335, 5 years after the battle, a warrior named Nicholas, son of Radislav, saved the king's life by defending him from the swords of 5 Wallachian fighters, giving Charles just enough time to slip away into the forest. Nicholas held back 5 men, alone, long enough for a king to run. Charles Robert of Hungary, the most powerful monarch in Eastern Europe, member of the House of Anjou, descendant of French kings, flees through the Carpathian mountains dressed as a peasant. He eventually reaches the fortress of Basarab days later, starving, humiliated, barely alive. Behind him, his army is annihilated. The rest of the Hungarian forces, 30,000 men who marched into Wallachia with absolute confidence, are completely destroyed. The casualties include the voivode of Transylvania, the priest who accompanied the expedition, and countless Hungarian nobles. Stephen Lackfi, the commander of the army, survives but returns to a kingdom in shock. The Viennese Illuminated Chronicle records the catastrophe in vivid detail. It describes how the Vlachs carried many away captive, both wounded and uninjured, and looted the bodies of the fallen, taking many weapons and much precious raiment, money in silver and gold, costly vessels and baldricks, many purses heavy with coins, and many horses with saddles and bridles. All which they carried away and gave to the voivode Basarab. Charles's entire baggage train, the supply wagons carrying the wealth and equipment of 30,000 soldiers, falls into Wallachian hands. It's not just a military defeat, it's a financial catastrophe. The victory sanctioned the independence of Wallachia from the Hungarian crown and altered its international status forever. For the first time, the world recognized Wallachia as an independent principality, not a vassal state. Basarab received international support and diplomatic recognition from neighboring powers. But here's what the Western chronicles don't want you to know. The Hungarian defeat was so humiliating that efforts were made to minimize it in official records. While the Viennese Illuminated Chronicle, produced in Hungary itself, could not hide the disaster, other Western sources downplay or omit the Battle of Posada entirely. Why? Because it shattered a fundamental assumption of medieval warfare, that heavily armored professional knights were invincible against peasant armies. 12,000 shepherds and farmers just destroyed 30,000 professional soldiers. The battle taught every empire from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean a lesson they didn't want to learn. The people of the Carpathian Mountains would never surrender. Terrain, knowledge, and desperation could defeat money, armor, and royal bloodlines. Charles Robert quickly rebuilt his army. Hungary had the financial power to recover, and by 1337 he was at war with the Holy Roman Empire. He maintained a de jure claim of suzerainty over Wallachia for diplomatic purposes, but everyone knew it was fiction. The relationship between Hungary and Wallachia remained tense until 1344, when Basarab pragmatically sent his son Alexandru to re-establish formal relations, not as a conquered vassal, as an equal negotiating peace. Basarab ruled Wallachia until his death in 1352, having founded the House of Basarab, the dynasty that would rule Wallachia for centuries and produce rulers like Vlad III Dracula. The golden eagle holding an orthodox cross, symbol of the Basarab dynasty, became the core of Romania's national coat of arms. That symbol remains today. The Battle of Posada became the founding myth of Wallachia, the moment a people decided they would rather die in their mountains than bow to empires. The tactical genius of Posada wasn't complicated. Basarab understood what military theorists would later formalize. In mountain warfare, the defender who knows the terrain holds every advantage. He used scorched earth to starve the invaders. He used false guides to lead them into a kill zone. He used archers and gravity as force multipliers. He used the forest as camouflage and the gorge as a trap, and when the enemy was exhausted, immobilized, and demoralized, he closed in for the kill. It's the same strategy that would be used by Swiss peasants against the Habsburgs, by Vietnamese guerrillas against technologically superior forces, by every underdog throughout history who understood that you don't fight the enemy on their terms, you make them fight on yours. If you found Basarab's story as intense as I did, please give this video a like. It really helps the algorithm share this hidden history with more people. And if you want to dive deeper into the forgotten corners of the past, make sure you're subscribed. I have a question for you to answer in the comments. If you were Charles Robert's advisor before the invasion, what would you have told him to convince him not to march into the Carpathians? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your take. Basarab I died in 1352, having lived long enough to see his independence unchallenged and his dynasty secured. Today, in Romania, November 12th is remembered not as a day of bloodshed, but as a day of defiance. Statues and monuments commemorate the voivode who taught empires that mountains bow to no king. In Curtea de Arges, the city Charles once occupied thinking he had won, there stands the Curtea de Arges monastery, where later Basarab rulers are buried. The golden eagle of Basarab still flies on Romania's coat of arms, a permanent reminder that 12,000 shepherds once stood in a mountain pass and said no to 30,000 soldiers. The Hungarian nobility tried to erase this defeat from history. They minimized it, downplayed it, tried to pretend it was a minor setback. But you can't erase a moment when the powerless became powerful, when the shepherd defeated the king, when the mountains themselves rose up in defiance. Next time we're diving into another forgotten battle where everything seemed lost until it was. You won't want to miss it. The final image to leave you with, picture Charles Robert, 5 years after Posada, signing that charter acknowledging Nicholas, son of Radislav, the man who saved his life. Every time he puts quill to parchment, he's reminded of the day he ran through the mountains in peasant rags while his army died behind him. And somewhere in those same mountains, Wallachia shepherds go back to tending their flocks, knowing they broke the most powerful king in Eastern Europe. Courage doesn't require a crown. Sometimes it just requires knowing which mountain pass to defend and refusing to bow when empires come calling. That's the legacy of Posada. That's the legend the Hungarian chronicles tried to bury. And that's why, nearly 700 years later, we're still telling this story.